Hello and welcome to Neuroshambles, the podcast that aims to shine a light into some of the murkier corners of what it's like to parent neurodivergent kids. I'm Mark Allen, and every episode I'm going to be swapping stories with my guests about some of the frankly ludicrous nonsense we have to deal with on a daily basis. So, if you're anything like me and you're feeling frazzled, overwhelmed and pretty much an outcast from polite society, join me. Hello and welcome to episode 45 of Neuroshambles. As always, it's a joy to have you back again, Neuroshamblers, so thanks for joining me. Now, I've got a confession straight off the bat here. This episode was supposed to be a standalone episode, but it soon became clear as I was chatting to my guest that this conversation was so rich and so nuanced that we really didn't want to truncate it or cut it short or essentially shortchange you guys. So we just let it run and explored all the various nooks and crannies of this topic of the week. And I'm really glad we did. But what it did mean is that we had to split it into two parts. What you have coming up is the first part of this topic, which I'm pretty sure is going to be pertinent to all neuroshamblers to one degree or another. We've also got some neurodiversity champions, some tiny epic wins, and some what the flip moments. So I'm going to stop delaying and we can get cracking.
Meet the guest.
So this week's guest is probably no stranger to Neuroshambles listeners, as he is one of the most prolific and thought-provoking advocates in the world of neurodiversity. Not only is he a parent to an autistic child, but he's also written several books about his lived experience as a neurodivergent, as well as being a tutor, a conference speaker, and, as anyone who might have listened to him on episode 32 of Neuroshambles will attest, a superlative podcast guest. I am delighted to be able to welcome him back to the show. It's Pete Wharmby. How you doing, Pete?
Hello, I'm fine, as always. Chugging away.
Chugging along. So obviously not all of my Neuroshambles listeners will have heard the previous episode that we recorded.
Indeed,
so
indeed.
If you'd just like to give us a quick recap of your neurodivergent setup over there.
Yeah, sure. I am primarily a writer and a speaker, do training, courses, speeches, all that kind of stuff that you do when you're in the world of writing books. All about being autistic, what it is to be autistic in the world, how the world isn't set up for autistic people, and these days increasingly how schools in particular are kind of really failing neurodivergent children in really quite significant ways. That's my not really new. I mean, I was a teacher for 15 years.
You've seen it from both sides, haven't you?
but certainly in terms of advocacy, it's the thing that I've swung towards. The book that I'm writing is focused entirely on education. I was just yesterday at the rally in London outside Parliament.
To be honest, though, that is where it feels like people's powers are most needed right now. I think it's certainly, from where I'm looking.
The disempowerment of parents of disabled children with special educational needs, the kind of victimization, the blame game that goes on over and over again, just parents not getting the support that their children deserve, was the kind of cause of that rally. And I gave a quick talk at it, quick speech at it. Never done anything like that before.
How was it? You rabble rousing, Pete?
Yeah, well, I was a bit, to be honest. You find your voice going up.
Yeah, of course.
You find the anger rising a bit. With Big Ben there, and just the atmosphere and the feeling that for hundreds of years people have stood on that spot and shouted at the government.
Yeah.
It kind of it takes over a little bit. So it was a fascinating experience. Lots of really good speakers. From across the community, and also Ed Davey was there from the Lib Dems, getting a little bit of media attention for once, because if you're not reformed, then you don't get much airtime.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was really nice. It was really nice. We shall see if anything comes of it, of course, but we are trying.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the neurodivergent setup in your home, you've got a daughter.
Indeed, yes, sorry.
Yes. No, it's fine. It's all part of the rich tapestry of neurodivergent neurodivergency going on over there.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I'm ADHD as well, so I'm going to forget what I'm talking about halfway through a sentence, But yeah, so my my daughter's almost certainly autistic, almost certainly ADHD, very very similarly presenting to me. She's at primary school at the moment, but obviously secondary school rears its head,
Okay, how old is she?
eventually. She's 10,
Right.
so it'll be next year.
Okay. And that's undiagnosed, but almost certainly neurodivergent.
Yeah, certainly from my point
Yeah.
of view, I mean, I don't think there's very much question as far as
You're
I
in
can tell.
a decent position to be able to judge as well.
Well, that's the thing, though. You'd hope so, but ultimately, somebody could just be like, "Well, they haven't got a proper diagnosis, therefore."
Maybe one day she'll sit you down and come out as neurotypical.
I mean, I can't see it. I really can't see it. It's that would be a shock, just
Be a
based on
disappointment, I would imagine.
how she is. But well, I mean, you are who you are, aren't you? But
Yeah, it's
but
true.
but
It's true.
ultimately, no. I mean, goodness me, she reminds me so much of me. She's better than I am, though. In many different ways, like far more outgoing and more confident, and doing better generally than I was at that age, which I think is really nice.
Do you think part of that is that you are aware of her neurotype and have been from an early age and have been accommodating that and not squashing it?
I mean, who knows? I can't take an external position, and sit above it all and look at it. But I mean, I would assume that has to have some kind of impact.
Hopefully.
Because yeah, I mean that's what we preach. When I go into schools and when I talk to parents, I talk about being informed, knowing what you're dealing with, and
Mhm.
knowing how autism works. I mean, all the stuff I talk about tonight, for example, will be along those lines. And yeah, you hope that if you do that stuff right, and if you are very mindful of neurodivergence in the home and in interactions with school, that yeah, presumably the end result of that would be a relatively happy child who's doing pretty well, as opposed to what I was like at 10 years old, which is no idea about my neurotype. My parents had no idea either, of course, because it was the early 90s and no one knew really.
It wasn't around then, Pete.
No,
Didn't
indeed.
exist.
Yes, indeed. And, I was struggling back then. I found school tricky. I was off school an awful lot. I always had tummy aches and things like that, so that I didn't
Mhm.
have to go in and I could spend a day recuperating a little bit. As I look back now, I can see that's what I was doing. And, I was shy, I was withdrawn, I was often quite self-isolating. Whereas my daughter is in many ways the opposite of that. I think she's got that tendency, just like I have. We're both naturally quite happy on our own and that kind of thing. But she's
Mhm.
very outgoing and very, very capable and
Great.
does very
Glad
well.
to
So
hear it.
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for introducing me to your setup, Pete. We will get on with the topic of the week because it's a big one.
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
I seem to bring the big ones to you, Pete, for some reason.
That's fine.
Um, but let's get through it. I think I'm really interested in unpicking it.
Meet the guest.
So this week's topic is one that is going to resonate with, I think, all Neuroshambles listeners to some degree, and that is difficulty with transitions. Now, obviously, all parents have to facilitate transitions for their children. That is a key part of the job description. From the seemingly simple day-to-day ones like getting up, having breakfast, brushing teeth, leaving the house can be a big one, but also some of the major transitions such as changing schools, moving house, or navigating puberty, which I'm dreading. Not for myself,
I was going to
obviously.
say.
I graduated a long time ago. But I think it's fair to say that not all parents experience the significant backlash of overwhelm experienced by our neurodivergent kids whenever a transition is introduced. So I wanted to have a closer look at why changing from one state to another can be so dysregulating for them. Now, in the last episode I recorded with you, Pete, we looked at masking. And
Yes.
what I found super helpful about that was hearing you describe how it feels from a neurodivergent perspective. Because obviously my kids aren't yet fully able to articulate very clearly to me at the moment what they're going through. So talking to you is like being given a bit of a backstage tour of what they might be experiencing. So I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about how this applies to transitions.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I struggle with transitions at the age of 42. I had to do one just 10, 15 minutes ago when I had to stop playing my video game, and had
I'm so
to.
sorry.
As you should be. No, and had to go through the rigmarole of getting ready for this. Like
Yes.
just getting into the right headspace, coming upstairs, plugging everything in. It's never really got any easier, if I'm honest.
Okay.
It still comes with its challenges, which I'm sure we will unpick in great detail.
Yeah. Because I think, the thing is that transitions in life are unavoidable.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like, you can't get around them. Everything is a transition to a degree. And I think that they cause dysregulation for all neuro-exceptional people to a greater or lesser extent. But I think it's even more keenly felt by children.
oh
I know that
yeah.
you're still having, difficulty with transitions now, but it's a fundamental part of growing up. Like childhood, that's all childhood is, right? It's a series of transitions.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up is an accelerator pad of transitions, mentally, physically, emotionally. They're very rarely in control of what they do. So much of their life is, by necessity dictated by adults, which has got
Yes.
to have a huge impact on kids
Oh
in
yeah.
terms of, certainly if they crave predictability and
Mhm.
certainty and routine, they don't know whether they're coming or going most of the time, I think.
No, and it's something that I think we're going to continue to come back to, and I think people often tend to overlook the sheer lack of autonomy that an autistic
Mm.
child has over their world. When I was up in Liverpool recently, I was doing a talk for the Performing Arts College up there. The
Uh-huh.
Paul McCartney one. Towards the end, somebody asked the classic question of, well, we've got to get them ready for the real world, haven't we? We've got to get them ready for
Oh,
adulthood.
God, I hate that.
And well, you get it all the time from teachers. It's water off a duck's back. That's how
Yes.
they view things. They view themselves as like the gatekeepers of the adult world. And I said to them, well, look at it this way. When they've graduated from here and when they're adults, when they're like 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, if they want to, they can change their socks during the middle of the day. If they want to, they can decide, you know what, actually, I'm going to go home now. Because they're adults. Adults have
Hmm.
enormous amounts of autonomy. I mean, we don't have as much
Yeah.
as we'd like. Don't get me wrong. If you work a 9 to 5 job, but even as an employee at a job, you've got way more independence and autonomy than a school child has.
Yes. Yes.
By orders of magnitude. And this is so
Hmm.
often forgotten. And this is why children, I think, autistic children in particular, have a particularly bad time, because they just do not have any of that freedom or independence to be able to do what they need to do at any given time.
To regulate, and if
Yeah,
if the,
yeah,
the if the adult doesn't really understand how to best accommodate neurodivergence, and then the neurodivergent child is not in an environment where they feel they can raise that,
yeah,
then they're having to swallow it all the time. They have to just deal with it, which is a horrible state to be living in.
yes,
And so much of this is sort of centered around transitions.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I guess one of the main issues with transitions is not knowing what's next, I think,
mm.
because it's planned by someone else.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah, absolutely, yes,
it's like, what have you got in mind?
yeah,
I don't know. So I thought I'd look at some of the different reasons why neurodivergent kids might be dysregulated by
yeah,
transitions,
absolutely.
and maybe look at some of the strategies that can help to make transitions easier. It's never going to make it easy, but it might sort of just take the edge off it a little bit, might smooth the transition a little bit.
That's the
Um,
aim. That's certainly the aim.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And I'm sure that everyone at home has got their own sort of methods of doing this. I'm only going to be able to suggest things that work for my lot, but I've
Yeah,
got quite a broad range of different presentations, so there might be something useful.
absolutely.
One of the reasons I think for kind of a difficulty with transitions is a fear of the unknown,
Hmm.
as I've just alluded to, right? Is that when you're trying to get your child to do something else, they don't necessarily know how that looks.
Yeah.
And that can cause anxiety and dysregulation.
Hmm.
Specifically, the autistic brain, I think, craves that a little more.
It does. It does. Yes. Yeah. I think very often people tend to believe that autistic people simply like routine and like predictability because that's just autism, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, autism, where you love routine, and
Yeah.
I'm not entirely convinced by that. Number one, because of the co-occurrence of ADHD.
Yeah,
How does that
absolutely. I was going to
work?
mention. Yeah.
Because if you're ADHD, that everything flies up in the air. But even with ADHD autistic people like myself, there is still a craving for routine, and I don't think it's because my brain naturally just is comfortable with routine. Because in many ways, it's not. There's something else going on. There's a reason why autistic people like routine. And it's a very straightforward one, and it's entirely relatable. It's simply because of stress. We like
Right.
routine because we are so stressed out all the time. We like
Okay.
familiar stuff because we know how to deal with it.
Familiarity, I
Yeah,
guess, and
yeah,
consistency.
mm,
And
yeah.
basically, knowing what's coming, so that I guess, all of our kids are on this high state of alert at all times, probably to a degree that I will never understand.
Oh yeah,
And so
yeah.
if you are constantly looking round the corner for whether there's a bear,
Hmm.
which can be how it feels, I'm sure,
Yep,
then any new activity, you don't know if there's a bear around the corner.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, yeah. That's
naturally,
basically it.
this fear of the unknown
Mm.
is part of that. I had a good example of this, which I mentioned briefly in one of the other episodes of Neuroshambles, but I think it really nicely illustrates it. Is that even if it's something nice, it can cause dysregulation, and
Oh
this
yeah.
happened with India. India had an invite to a birthday party, and the invite was written by a classmate, and it simply was a picture of a cat with a star on it, and it just had an address and a date and a time, right?
Ah, I
Which I
don't like
thought was
that.
wonderful.
I don't
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. Whereas India was just like, fuck no.
Yeah, that does not.
Because
That doesn't fill me with happiness. It's like what's gonna happen.
it's the mystery cat. So India was obviously like not really on board with it. And I said, like, do you want to go to the party? And she started shaking her head and going, no. And then I sort of pieced it together and said, is it because you don't know what's going to happen? And
Mm,
she said yes. So
yeah.
I wrote a response to the mum, and just to explain it very clearly, I was like, look, India needs to know what it looks like, so that she can kind of understand, because she's feeling a bit anxious about it. And the mum wrote a phenomenal response. It was wonderful. Like I did it as one of the Neurodiversity champions, because it was just like an unbelievably beautifully worded response about, like, India can come over and see our house before the
Oh
party if you want,
wow.
on a different day. Here's what we're having for food. These are the games that my daughter's got planned. And if she doesn't like the food, then we can find something different. And it was just like so wonderfully worded and so inclusive.
Yeah.
And I sort of read it out to India, and she was like, oh yeah, fine, I'm totally going.
Well, there you go. Yeah, but I honestly thought that was going to go in a different direction.
Oh,
I
okay.
thought you were going to say that the mum was going to say, "Oh no, it's all a surprise," because that
No,
that is
yeah,
when things really go wrong. But I mean, that
we've got a bear.
yeah, like because so many autistic people don't like surprises for exactly this reason. Because
Yes.
let's unpick this a little bit then.
Yeah.
Why would India be so afraid? Because some people out there will be listening and thinking, well, a party's great, a party's a good thing. How
Yeah.
different can they be, and all this
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. But when it comes down to being autistic, a person's often like regular everyday experience of being autistic is going to boil down very often to your sensory experience
Hmm.
and your communicative social experience. Okay, I mean there's other things too, but they're two of the really big kind of
To the big guns.
the big pillars of autism. And a party represents enormous challenges in both directions. You've got how noisy is it going to be, how many people are going, what kind of place are we going to be in, is it going to be
Yeah.
echoey, is it going to be dark, is it going to be light, is there going to be like the likelihood of like a quiet place I can go and hide in it, like a public toilet, like if you know that you're going, for example, to a restaurant Even as a kid, your brain is kind of already starting to go through the motions of, okay, I've been to a restaurant before. They usually have a toilet, so I could maybe go and hide in there. Usually we're only there for about an hour or so, so I'm not going to be there for too long. The lighting's probably going to be okay, so that's not too... Do you know what I mean? That all of that stuff is whirring away.
But it's so interesting to hear this articulated, though, because I'm just like, let's go to a restaurant.
Oh, God,
like,
yeah. I don't even know
what
that would feel like. I don't know how it could feel to be so blasé about something like that.
Yeah.
Whenever I do quite a lot of new things, and I go to lots of new places and, experience new areas and stuff. So I do have to kind of, go into bars and restaurants and things that I've never been in before, but it's a process, that I have to go through to figure it out and work up to it. Yeah. So India was probably having all of that going on in her head when she saw the kind of vague ambiguity, and that's the thing, it's ambiguity, vagueness, that is one of our greatest enemies. We like to know what we're dealing with. So that initial invitation is going to be sparking off all these fears. So you've got this sensory fear, is it going to be uncomfortable for me? If I go to this place, is it going to make me really, really uncomfortable and really unhappy? And is there a likelihood that I'm going to be pushed into meltdown? Now, a child is unlikely to be able to put that into words. Maybe a teenager would, probably quite easily. But somebody who's like 8, 9, 10 probably won't be able to. But they'll certainly remember what meltdown feels like. And they won't.
And so it's an instinct.
It becomes...
You kind of clam up immediately because of...
You don't want that again. You do not want to do that again. Because when that happens, it's horrible. Mummy and daddy are angry with you. I mean, not saying that you would be, but often that is the reality. Other kids look at you like you're weird, you're embarrassed, you're shamed, all of that. You don't want to go through that again. So you start to think, I am not going to put myself in a situation where I could find myself having meltdown.
Yeah, and when given the option,
you'll say no. Of course.
Do you want to go or no? I know what no looks like, so therefore it's a hard no.
I can stay at home and I can do what I always do, and I know that if I do that, I probably won't have a meltdown, and I'll probably be relatively comfortable in my own environment that I'm used to. It's actually an enormous ask to ask an autistic person to enter any setting that they haven't got some kind of pre-warning about. Now, that wouldn't be the case. If the world was established and set up with autistic people in mind from the very beginning, that probably wouldn't be an issue. Not that often.
But how would that look, though?
It'd be darker. It would be... No, I mean, honestly, it would be dimmer, but it wouldn't be dark. It wouldn't be like, utter blackness everywhere.
End of days kind of dark. No, but what I'm saying is, how would you ease transitions then? If things were to be set up...
it wouldn't be such a problem. It wouldn't be such a problem. All of our stress levels as autistic people would commensurately be lower. Me, my daughter, your daughter, all the autistic people everywhere, if the world was more set up for us, our stress levels would just be at a far lower level all of the time. So there'd be more capacity.
Yeah, this is the thing I'm sort of noticing lately, actually, is that none of these things that I talk about are really hard and fast. They're very situational sometimes.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Depending on how regulated my kids are.
Oh, yeah.
So if my kids are generally well regulated, so like summer holidays that have just gone is a good example. I was steeling myself for like a bit of a, we're just going to camp in the house.
Yeah.
We're not going to do a great deal. That was what I was kind of gearing up for. And it was fine because I'm being led by them.
Yeah.
But over the holidays, they were just in a really they were just regulated and they were able to do what they needed to do, that they were much more up for doing stuff outside the house than I imagined that they would be.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't be? Imagine if you were living in your house and all of the lights were 50% brighter and all of the sounds were 50% louder, and you kept getting told off for getting things wrong. You would be like, I don't want to go camping now. I'm too. And then if somebody came and turned all that down, and all of a sudden people were being kinder to you and more patient, and just slowing down a bit,
it just takes it off the boil a little bit, right? So you don't bubble over.
Anyone would feel the same. You just feel like, oh, I can take on the world now. I've got some space. I've got some capacity. Things have been made slightly easier. And this is the thing. This is what I go around telling everybody. Like the ramifications for getting this right are absolutely they're enormous. If every school and every doctor and every hospital and every God, everything just had as its focus, let's reduce the stress for autistic people as much as we can realistically. Not reduce it completely, that'll never happen. But if we could just all just do our little job to reduce it a little bit, what you'd see is a cumulative reduction in stress for every autistic person everywhere. And all of a sudden, we'd have more ability to do all the stuff we actually want to do. And ironically, we'd get into less trouble because we would be able to do what other people wanted us to do too.
And also,
You know?
crucially, it's not going to disadvantage the neurotypicals
No,
by
they won't
having
even.
those
They won't even
accommodations.
notice. They never
Exactly,
notice.
right. It's a stealth thing.
Yeah. Like how many neurotypical people notice when they go into a supermarket during autism hour? When some supermarkets dim the lights slightly and turn the music off, it's usually like 10 a.m. because the assumption is autistic people don't work, of course.
I genuinely didn't know there was an autism hour. Is that a thing?
In some supermarkets do it, yeah, not all, but some
Amazing.
do, and
Oh, I need to
museums,
find that out.
museums do it too. And the museum in town
Yes.
has
Yeah.
a thing kind of set out. But the point is that when that's happening, I genuinely don't think the neurotypical people notice, because
They're going to come in and go, can we turn the music up and these lights off? This is boring.
yeah, I mean,
They're not, of course. It's
maybe
not-
a couple might, but I very much doubt it. The majority will just go boot loot loo, do their shopping without even noticing anything's
and
happened at all.
those ones that are objecting, everyone else will look at them going, they're just having a meltdown.
Yeah, the only thing they'll wonder why there are so many people in the supermarket all wearing jumpers with steam trains on. That's the one thing that they're going to be thinking, like, this is a bit weird. That was a totally unreasonable overgeneralization about autistic
I'm here
people and
for it.
trains.
I'm here for it.
Please do not be offended.
I just wanted to pick up on one of the other things that you mentioned in terms of the fear of the unknown, because we looked at the sensory side of that, but also the social side.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yes.
No. I'm here to bring you back to the point in hand.
Yeah.
Because again, that's another thing for birthday parties, but any transition, I guess, is there are gonna be people. I can't control people.
Yeah, it's probably the bigger of the two. To be honest with you, it probably is the one that's more impactful. I mean, many people talk a lot about environment and sensory, and that is key, and it's really important, and it's also relatively easy to figure out. You just offer accommodations, you just make things more comfortable. The social side is far more difficult, because the kind of thing that a typical autistic child, for example, is going to be worried about when it comes to the social communicative side of things at a party, for example, is going to be the usual stuff of being misunderstood, of being shamed, being embarrassed for getting the wrong end of the stick, or for telling a joke that doesn't land, or for asking questions that are deemed silly, or for just staying quiet and not talking, or the opposite, going on too long about your favorite thing. All of these things that we autistic people tend to do in our communication, so for example, oversharing or talking too much about Pokemon, can lead to people, even at young age, even other children, being frustrated with us, being fed up with us, being pissed off with us. Like, oh, God, you're going on about Pokemon again. For God's sake, shut up. And you never know when that's going to happen as an autistic person, as a kid in particular, because you haven't got the lived experience to kind of know the patterns. It always seems to come as a bit of a surprise when you get that criticism. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, and you think you've just been doing normal stuff. You think you've been communicating with your friends, and then all of a sudden it turns out, no, you've not been. You've actually been making a fool of yourself. And there's no human being alive would willingly put themselves into that situation. But autistic kids and adults like myself are expected to do that all of the time, because we get very little. The phrase to give somebody the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
One of my favorite phrases, as somebody who tries to be as reasonable as possible, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt if I can, until it's proven otherwise very strongly. Autistic people, we don't tend to receive the benefit of the doubt very often. Children in particular, our actions and our words and our phrasing and our body language and our eye contact are usually interpreted in the worst possible way by the people around us,
because everyone is assumed neurotypical unless proven otherwise.
And if you're not doing that, then you're assumed to be deviant or up to something or just weird.
I don't think we're in a place in society yet. I think we're getting there where people would assume neurodivergence rather
No, we're not.
than
No, we're
rude
not.
or
No,
weird.
no. We're nowhere near.
I think we're getting there. I
We're
think I
getting
have a
close.
lot
Oh, we
more
are getting closer, yes, but it's still a
a
long,
long
way to
go. I get that. Yeah. So in terms of the fear of the unknown, that is, hugely problematic. And when India knew who was going, literally a list of all the people that was going, which is just like amazing, was totally on board because there were no surprises. Great. Had a
Absolutely.
wonderful time.
And actually, even just knowing who's going, when you know who you're going to be dealing with,
Yeah.
people you've spoken to before, as an autistic person, you kind of know instinctively whether you're going to have an issue with them or not.
Yeah, I have allies as well,
Yeah,
crucially.
are they the people that tend to pull me up on this stuff, or are they the people that do give me the benefit of the doubt?
Mhm.
And if it turns out it's mostly other kids that are pretty cool with you, then it's like, oh, thank God, I'll be fine then,
My people.
Whereas, if you find out it's going to be with strangers or relatives that you've never met of the birthday person, and this kind of thing, then all bets are off. Who knows what you're going to be dealing with? Who knows how judgmental people are going to be and how much grief you're going to get for telling a bad joke or for talking too much about Lego or whatever.
Yeah.
You're really running a gauntlet there. And that's why we like the information, and that's why the transition of going to the party, if that information hasn't been provided, is going to be the equivalent of asking a child to enter a den of wolves. When you're trying to push them through the door and they're screaming and crying because they don't want to go in.
And the wolves have party poppers.
Yeah, absolutely. And balloons,
little
and
party
stuff.
blowers. Nothing to do with it.
That's the mindset you got to be in. There's a reason why they are so distraught.
Yeah.
They're not doing it. They're not playing up. They're not trying to wind you up. They are as distraught as they look, and in my opinion, for very good reason.
Yeah.
So
in terms of strategies for dealing with it, as we said, then detail. Understanding what it is and clearing up the ambiguity. I think it's interesting that you put it as ambiguity, and I think that makes much more sense than routine. It's like, just tell me what it is and I can make a decision. Another of the strategies is sort of having storyboards, social stories. This is what's going to happen. And,
the trouble with those are they tend to be very didactic. They tend to be very much of the kind of like, this is what happens at parties, rather than this is what's going to happen at this particular party.
Yes.
It treats autistic kids as kind of lacking in nuance, which is the worst way to deal with. Autistic people are packed with nuance. And those like mass-produced social stories. They are great at some things, but usually what an autistic kid and adult wants is a tailored, detailed rundown of what this actual situation is going to entail.
So I was kind of thinking about school in particular, because that is more routine based, of like, in this lesson you will be seeing this teacher and you'll be studying this, and then after that you'll be going to break. And so I mean, Otto really benefits from having a timetable really clearly planned out. It's not a social story in that sense. I think that's probably more for younger kids, because it's more easy to engage with, but it's having that all kind of clearly mapped out, I think.
Yeah. And not skimping on the detail. The problem is that, as always, we run into the double empathy problem, which is that non-autistic people are going to struggle to imagine what it is we actually need. So what they'll do is they will kind of do a kind of bodge job. No offense, but it will be a bit of a bodge job where they'll think to themselves, okay, so what could they possibly need to know? Right. Well, what I'll do is, I wouldn't personally need to know anything. So what I'll do is I'll go one step extra and give them that detail. When actually what you probably need to do is like 3 or 4 steps extra. It's the difference between saying, so, you'll go through the door and there'll be a party in there and there'll be balloons and cake and you'll sit down with your friends and you'll play a game. It's the difference between that and saying, right, so you go through the door and there's going to be probably 7 or 8 people in there. And you've been in that room before, haven't you? Because you've had a sleepover that time. So if you remember how the room looks, just imagine that many people in there. And there'll be cake probably in the middle of the table. But don't eat that yet. Because they're going to cut that. It's going to a level that would, to a neurotypical person, feel ludicrous.
Yeah.
And you'll feel weirdly self-conscious when you're doing it, because you'll be thinking, surely I don't need to go into this much detail. Surely I don't. I must sound mad. I must sound crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, actually, you're doing the right thing. If you are thinking you sound like you're going too far, you're probably doing it right.
You've nailed it.
Yeah, because that's our experiences are that different. And I know this because I can't imagine how it feels to be you.
And that level of detail, I think, is enough to sort of get you into the room, right? And I think once you're there and you see what it looks like, then, because I'm just thinking, there is always going to be things that appear that are not going to be anticipated. No one's going to anticipate that Alvin's going to eat too many Wotsits and be sick on the floor, right? You're not going to put that in your social story. But I think once you're in that environment and you go, okay, I see what this is, then maybe you're more able to deal with those sort of other curveballs.
You are, and as I said earlier, your stress levels have been reduced because you have been given the heads up, so you got more capacity for then the unknown. Whereas if you imagine a kid that's been forced in against their will and they're crying and they've finally got through the door and they're still really upset and really dysregulated, and then little Bobby pukes on his Wotsits, that's probably going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they're just going to bolt. They're just going to go, and that's why they haven't had any slack built into their systems. They are rigid and on edge completely because they haven't had anyone sit them down and calm them down and give them the info. So there's no slack. The first thing that happens is going to snap everything, and this is what we see for kids all the time. They go to school and they're so het up that the very first time that a kid looks at them funny, they punch them. Or they run screaming into the toilets, and all the teachers are scratching their heads. Where did this come from? Like, wow, that came out of nowhere. It's like, no, it didn't.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Okay, so other potential strategies we're just going to whiz through because obviously we've got to.
We need like a special day-long version of this, like
I'd love
24 hours.
I'd love to. We'll have a whole conference on transitions. So timers are quite useful. I find with my kids, timers for transitions of going, okay, like India again is another one for that of like, can we do these things? Like, oh, I'm kind of doing something at the moment and I can't really break out of it. Maybe I'm working or something. And so I'll say 10 minutes and then she'll run off and go get a timer and I'll see 10 minutes. I was like, okay, I have to now adhere to this. But that's very useful because it's the knowing when that's going to happen instead of just the ambiguity, as you say.
And you need that warning.
Yes. Familiar objects is another one of carrying those into the new situation. So you've got this sort of level of familiarity, I guess, whether that's a toy or a fidget spinner or some kind of iPads even
and anything that just reminds you of where you were last relaxed, really, anywhere that gives you like an anchor to your normal resting state of being in a safe space that very well. So for kids, obviously kids can get away with carrying toys, soft toys, that kind of thing. As an adult, my watch very much fulfills that.
Oh, okay, my phone. Interesting. I was going to ask because you recently went to Australia, didn't you? Which is like a massive transition. I was just wondering how what you put in place to help you get through that.
Well, there's nothing particularly magical, that you do. I was traveling alone, which helps an awful lot. But what I tend to do to be able to cope with all of these travel-based transitions that I have to undergo, because I do travel a lot for work, is knowing ahead of time where I'm going, which generally just involves looking on Google Earth an awful lot.
Okay.
Just Google Maps, just checking things out. I like to know what the building looks like.
Oh, so you like really zoom in and look at the street and look at the neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was traveling to this hotel conference complex in Gold Coast, in Queensland. And I knew that at some point I'd want to go to the coast itself, like go to the centre of the city, where the beaches are and all the bars and coffee shops and stuff. I knew I'd want to do that. So I had to really carefully look at, the routes from the hotel to the town.
And if you didn't have access to that, do you think you would just not have done it?
It's very hard to say. I've only had this weird work that I've got these days, since the advent of Google, I would have coped before we could do Street View and stuff like that. I don't know. I would have done less. I can say that. I think I would have made it. I'd have got there because of my other things that I do, like making sure that I know exactly how I'm going to deal with transfers and where I'm going to park my car and all that, like knowing it absolutely knowing it, not like winging it, but knowing it. Every little bit I know. And I would have got to Australia, but if I hadn't seen in advance the streets and the routes and the map, I probably would have just hidden in my hotel room the entire time.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder how people, before the advent of this level of technology would have,
Yeah.
because looking at a to Z is not gonna cut it, is it? Right.
Well, I mean, it can do.
Okay.
I mean, like I do remember. I'm just old enough to remember pre-Google. I was born in '83, so most of my young teenage years, it was just physical maps. But I pored over those maps.
Okay.
I badgered my parents for Ordnance Survey maps because of the detail.
You could see the contours and the vectors and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I used to just spend hours looking at maps and figuring out like where roads went and how it all worked. And I think that was in many ways just me making sense of the world, in a more analog kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think, people would have always had that. But the fact that we have Street View, like, use it. Like, if you're a parent of an autistic child, use it to show them absolutely everywhere you're going to be going. Just and get rid of that parental desire for surprise, which even I have. I have to an extent. I'm like, I don't want to spoil how cool it is, so I'm not going to show them. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Just show them what you're going to be doing.
Which I guess actually, because again, one of the things I was going to touch on is that holidays is that sort of distillation of this fear of the unknown, of not knowing what people are going to sound like, what it's going to smell like, what's the food, what's it going to look like, how hot is it going to be. And I've not thought about this before, but actually doing Google Earth and really taking them down that, I think might have eased the transition.
I did that for my daughter when we went to Slovenia last summer. We looked at where we were going to be staying. We followed the Google Street View into town down to the lake, went around the lake a little bit. I showed her some of the best restaurants so that she knew what to expect. And, I don't know whether it had an impact, but I think it did because she took stuff in her stride, as did I, because I knew where I was going, which I need. If I don't have that, then, I will genuinely struggle. Like, if I find myself in London and I haven't put this work in, I found myself walking around London after giving like a big speech, like being really professional. Look at me on a big stage, talking to all these people, and then I leave. And I've got these highfalutin ideas about going for like a nice meal just by myself, going and find a restaurant and sit down, have some lovely food. And after about an hour, I'm nearly in tears, walking around London, like totally overwhelmed.
London must be a sensory nightmare.
Yeah, like totally overwhelmed. Too nervous to go in anywhere because I don't know how I'm going to sit down. I don't know where to sit. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know. Is this a place where you've got to ask for a table, or are they going? And I don't want to make a fool of myself because I've made a fool of myself all my life, and I'm done with that. I hate it. I don't want to do that.
And this, I guess, is that you have been so dysregulated, or you become even more dysregulated by just walking around London and the noise and the smells and the sights and stuff.
And your battery's running out. Your social battery's running out, but also your phone battery's running out. You've got time pressure. It's noisy, it's smelly, it's loud. It's too much information everywhere. All you're desperately wanting to find, which I would find if I was working in like a little village somewhere, is a quiet pub where I know I can just go in. I know I can order a pint at the bar, and I know I can order a sandwich, and that's easy. That I've done that before. But there's nowhere like that in central London. Everything's weird and slightly alien, and I suffer for not having done my homework, basically.
Wow.
Cheerful stuff.
So another of the reasons that I think our kids have difficulty with transitions, aside from fear of the unknown, is conversely fear of the known. Fear of experiences that they've been through before, and
they don't want to do it again. They don't
want to do it again.
Hence school.
That's a big one. That's a huge one, I think. And and it makes sense because as adults we experience this, even as neurotypicals, like going to the dentist. I'm not keen on doing a tax return. I'd rather not. Filling out an EHCP form. I'd rather go to the dentist and fill out a tax return. Because I've been there.
Absolutely.
I've done it and it's rubbish. So we procrastinate and we delay as adults. But we have the freedom to do that. Right?
Yes,
We can do that. We haven't got someone behind us going, apart from, you're the tax man sending you emails and stuff.
who you
But,
can kind of ignore.
but you don't have someone else just kind of standing over you and having an expectation that you'll do it. That's sort of to a degree self-guided. But for our kids, they have this fear of experiences that they've been through and not enjoyed. But they also have someone pushing them to do it again and again and again in the instance of school.
Yeah, absolutely they do. And it's incredibly difficult because when you know that a situation is going to overwhelm you, and as far as you're concerned, there's little doubt about that, the last thing you need is someone continually pushing you into it.
Yeah.
But the trouble is people will continue to push you into it because, number one, they don't believe that it's as stressful as you say it is.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. People have a tendency to assume that their child is over exaggerating a little bit, which don't get me wrong, they might be doing, but for the most part, autistic kids, they are feeling what they're feeling, and you don't want to be. So you've got people who are just disbelieving you, but you've also got the people who think that it's good for you.
Yeah, it's those ones.
Like you've got to go in because you've got to get used to it. Basically, what they do is they apply exposure therapy because they've heard at some point, that if you've got a fear of spiders, the best thing to do is to hold a spider, which may or may not be true. They've heard about that and they know about that, and they may have experienced it in their lives because they're neurotypical, and they think, well, they just got to get used to it. But exposure therapy doesn't work with the social fear that I've talked about.
Yes,
it doesn't work with the environmental fear. It never goes away. You can find ways of trying to manage it and to like stim it away or wear ear defenders to get it out, but ultimately it's always going to happen.
Yes, you're still feeling that
overwhelm.
dysregulation.
Yeah.
So it's not like inoculation that you're just sort of like a tiny bit of it and all of a sudden you're going to eventually become galvanized to it. It's always
exactly
there.
It simply doesn't work like that. And I think again it's the double empathy problem because autistic people are experiencing this and we experience our sensory stress, and non-autistic people can only imagine because they don't know what it's like, and I think they do imagine it to be a bit like vaccination. You got to be careful mentioning that word when you're talking about autism, of course.
Oh God!
But
yeah.
Let's not go there. But I think we assume that a little bit of this will help. And it's just so misguided because it's hard to explain, but I don't think anyone ever gets used to. For example, I'll use my usual old standard semi-joke that I always use. Wet socks in the morning. When you tread in a puddle in your socks and your sock feels wet. No one ever gets used to that. You don't get used to the shock of it and the feeling of ooh, squelchy, and every human on earth would change their sock at that point, and if they were told they couldn't, they would be slightly grumpy for the rest of the morning until it dried.
Yeah.
No one's going to get used to having a slightly damp, unexpected sock. It's always going to be like, ugh, God, ugh, like that. And to expect otherwise is bizarre. Absolutely bizarre to expect that an autistic person's sensory overwhelm can just kind of melt away through experience. If anything, as you get older, it gets worse. As things as your defenses are actually ground down. By the time you get to my age, I can deal with way less now than I could in my 20s.
Okay.
My resilience for overwhelming spaces and noise and brightness and smells is way lower than it used to be.
Is part of that you understanding more about your neurotype now, though? When were you diagnosed?
I was 32.
Okay.
No, 34. 34. And I'd already, by that point, noticed. I'd already started to really notice
but in
that
your
I was
20s,
overwhelmed.
you hadn't. I'm just wondering because I know that they diagnosed autistic ADHD people once they sort of understand that they are autistic ADHD.
We're kind to ourselves.
But also suddenly see all the dysregulating shit that they were just swallowing.
Absolutely.
And then pushing back on it. So I'm just wondering if that has an impact as well.
No, I mean, that did happen. Don't get me wrong, that did happen. But I'd already kind of, looking back, I had already really started to withdraw.
Okay.
Because everything was too much. In my early 20s, I used to, I played in a band and I was, used to going in bars and playing music and, the smells and the noise and horrible places. And I mean, I didn't cope brilliantly, but I did cope,
Yeah.
But by the time I was 30 or even 28, 29, I just couldn't do that anymore.
Mhm.
It's a bit like you're surrounded by a big wall that you've kind of built to try and keep this stuff out, but it eventually starts to erode
Yeah.
and fall down,
So if we look at the fear of the known, then, because obviously if it's something that they didn't enjoy, like I went on the London Eye and I hated it, it's like, fine, don't do it again. But
Yeah, of
there are
course, yeah.
things that you need to do again, right? By obligation or by, the fact that you have to go into school. That's the big one, really. I think that's the biggest one, is that there's an expectation that you go into school. You've got teachers and the government and the LA
Yes.
telling you have to go into school,
Yeah.
and your parents telling you have to go into school. That's a huge transition for a lot of neurodivergent kids who are currently in school, which is why
Yes.
so many neurodivergent kids are not in school, because it's
Yeah.
just become too much. And I don't know how you really deal with something like that for such a prolonged period.
Yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately, it is the biggest transition that anyone will face in the day. That morning. Well, even when you're an adult, you've got that morning transition
Yeah.
where you go from home to where you're going to spend the day, work, school,
Mhm.
whatever. It's a difficult transition, and yeah, most autistic kids, if they don't like school, will have some very, very good reasons as to why they won't like it and why they
Yeah.
will resist and why they won't want to go. And ultimately, what that boils down to is who's going to blink first.
Mhm.
That's how it pans out. Is the school going to blink and actually do something about it? Is the school going to take seriously its duty of care and take seriously the idea of reasonable adjustments and adapting itself to suit the needs of the child? Or are they going to keep staring, stare the kid down
Yeah.
to the point where the kid blinks first, and the child will therefore usually do one of two things. They will either literally become a school refuser and simply will not go, and that will lead down the path that we know leads down to tremendous stress for both the child and the parents. Or will the child acquiesce to being traumatized on a daily basis? That's all it really boils down to. And there are obviously things that we can do to help a child manage the enormous stress of
Yes.
school.
Mhm.
Again, it all boils back down to stress. It all boils back down to what I started by talking about with environment and social
Yeah.
stresses. It's those two things again. So yeah, we as parents, we can do what we can do. We can advocate for our child with the school. We can meet with them. We can talk to them. We can try to guide the school down the path of reasonable adjustments.
Mhm.
Show them and tell them what their child needs, and that can work or it might not. It depends absolutely entirely on the personality of the people you're talking
Yeah,
to.
it really does. It makes a
It
huge
really does.
difference.
There's nothing, because usually the stuff that you're asking for is free or very, very cheap, and usually it doesn't even take that much time. So it's not like you're coming up against barriers of money.
Y-
Often, I mean, sometimes you do, admittedly, but often it's just stuff like, can you, for example, let my child leave lessons 2 minutes early? Can
Yeah. Yeah.
give my child the ability not to have to wear a tie, like gift them with that boon, that they don't have to wear a tie to school. And these are things that are free. They are fundamentally free. They are entirely dependent on the personality of the school and the people within it
Yes.
as to whether they're willing to be that flexible.
And I guess as parents, you have to have the confidence and you
You
have to
do.
have the energy to be able to request those
Yeah.
accommodations for your
Yeah.
kids, and to know that that is perfectly reasonable. Because I think
Yes.
early on, when you're maybe not even sure of your child's neurotype, and maybe you're still really trying to work out what this looks like and how it presents in your child, to go to the school and say, look, I need my child to leave 5 minutes before the end of the school day, because
Yes.
coming out
Yeah.
in amongst 200 other kids is incredibly dysregulating and leads to meltdown.
Yeah.
Like early on in your schooling career, that is a big ask
It
to
is.
do.
It is indeed. The good news is, though, in some ways, if you are the parent of a suspected neurodivergent kid, there is a bit of a. I've got to be careful here, but if you start to kind of cut your teeth on this at nursery, you know, start to get a bit of experience in
Go in
asking for
small.
this stuff with, honestly, like, you know, just start small with nursery
Yeah. Can
teachers,
he
and
have his
you know,
cereal and
talk
his
to them
milk in
about it.
separate bowls? You know, that
Exactly,
kind of thing.
and just get used to it. But you're right. Ultimately, most parents don't have the confidence because they don't have the understanding.
Mhm.
Not because they're you know, foolish or anything,
No,
but just
no, no.
because no one's taught this stuff. You know, you weren't taught this stuff at school. No one came into school and said, "Hey, here's what autism is." You know, just in case. You
Well,
know,
you're
that never
sort of
happened.
discouraged from rocking the boat as well, I think, when
Oh,
you're
you
dealing
are.
with
Oh,
something of
absolutely, you
that
are.
scale, because school is a big
Yeah.
operation. In terms of the magnitude of school and the number of people, you know, it only really works if everyone conforms, right? That's the whole reason for
Yes.
all of this. And so for you to sort of put your hand up and go, actually, I'm gonna make a bit of trouble here by asking something.
The thing to remember always, to any parents listening, if you're out there, listen, you're not alone.
No, no, no.
There are
We
dozens
are
in
legion.
your school alone of parents of autistic kids. But what happens is we are divided and conquered. We are spoken to individually and treated like we're all asking individually for special dispensation,
Mhm.
when actually all we're really trying to do is to get the schools to adhere to their basic requirements, which is accommodations for students of all
Yeah.
various types. And we're doing that really technically as a collective, because there will be more than one autistic child in the school, obviously. But they like to make you think that you're on your own and that you're being unreasonable. And look, at the end of the day, what this boils down to, as far as I can see, and I said this in London yesterday, we are still, the school system is still very soaked, I think is the right
Mhm.
word, soaked in its social history of being a charitable good established by the establishment
Mhm.
for the betterment of the poor,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah.
And even though now in 2025 we know better than that, and we know that actually having an educated populace is definitely beneficial, we want that anyway. Free education should be a no brainer because everyone needs to be educated to a certain level. We know all that now, but we're still stuck in this old Victorian mindset that ultimately, look, as the government, we're doing you a favor here.
Mhm.
So stop asking for anything extra.
Yeah.
You know, how rude are you? We are providing your child with free education, and here you are demanding more.
Yeah.
You know, and I really genuinely think on a subliminal level that is still there. And there is a resistance within SLTs, head teachers, the very establishment, the Department for Education itself, to actually recognize that they are bound to actually do more.
Yeah.
They need
Yeah.
to do more. They have to do more. And that it's not good enough just to be like, well, you know, this is what you're given. This is what we're going to do for you because, you know, look, we're doing you a favor. Ultimately, that's the shift that has to happen, and it's a very difficult shift because it's culture. It's a cultural shift
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
where the education system has to kind of back up a little bit and recognize that it is not a moralistic social enterprise, which is, you know how the Victorian
Yeah.
like landowners and mill owners had this moralistic paternal kind of
Mhm.
way about them.
Mhm.
You know, we know what's best for you poor folk. You know, we know what's best. We'll sort you out, don't you worry, kind of
Yeah.
attitude. I think that still reverberates within the
Interesting.
halls of education.
Yeah.
Oh, we know best. We are the experts. We are in charge. We are doing this for your own good. A very utilitarian
Yes.
kind of angle,
But
you know?
also that's sort of metamorphosized into you'll take what you're given.
You'll take what you're given and be glad of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, be glad of it. Like Mr. Bumble in
Yeah.
Oliver Twist, you know?
Having said that, if you get someone who is open to your advocacy, it's
Oh,
phenomenal.
which does happen. Yes.
And like
Yes,
my
absolutely.
kids' school have been amazing for that. I mean, I'm like 3 kids in now, so they're just so the,
They're used to it
the
by now, yeah.
relationship that I have with them is wonderful because I am very vocal and very, you know, collaborative, and I will send emails, you know,
Yeah,
regularly going,
yeah,
here are the reasons that Otto is so dysregulated, and here are the things that we can do to help.
yeah.
And, you know, even things like just saying, look, can he and India come out? Can I pick him up at reception rather than the playground when hordes of children are like pouring
Perfect.
out of
Yes.
school?
Yeah.
And they were like, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely fine. And that tiny accommodation
It's free and it's
has
brilliant.
made the world of difference because they don't come out
Absolutely.
dysregulated. So
Yeah.
just have the confidence, I guess, to advocate for
Yeah,
some.
and you do get that, but it becomes a bit of a postcode lottery,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
if you're lucky, you'll have there'll be an individual Senko or a little group of teachers or an autistic teacher who knows all about it, and that's like striking gold, because you've got an ally, that's someone who will do what they can. But if you haven't got that,
yeah.
and you just met with a brick wall that so many parents are met with, a kind it's it's horrible
I
experience,
like this
to
idea that you came up, well, didn't come up with earlier, but I like the idea you articulated earlier about like parents of autistic kids sort of grouping together, forming a mob. Maybe not a mob, but
well, a
but
collective.
advocating as a
Yeah.
collective
Yeah.
rather to say, look, these are commonalities between all of our kids who present very differently, but here are the things that you
Yeah,
could
but there are some
do.
basic commonalities. Yeah.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting concept I've not really thought about. I don't know.
I mean, ultimately, I think what you'd want, if that kind of thing did exist, would for it to be like, I don't know, a community company or something, and for it to do training for teachers, you
Mhm.
know, getting that, not because, for me, that's what it boils down to. It's knowledge.
But then the
Most,
Senko's meeting with having one meeting with lots of people rather than lots of meetings with one person.
oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that really isn't explored. Everyone is very isolated and alone.
Mm,
Everyone feels like they're having to fight, and everyone always talks about how you got to start from the beginning every single time. And you get fed up of having to
yeah.
explain it all again. Whereas if it was like a collective of you, it's like 4 or 5 parents, 10 parents, or something like that, and you're all just like, well, yeah, of course, this is for all of
Because
us.
also when you first when you're first starting out as a parent of a neurodivergent, you're sort of looking around the playground to identify other parents of neurodivergent and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
will possibly look at how their child emerges from the school and go, oh, that might be one of ours, but they don't know it yet. They might not know
yeah.
it yet, or you just look for this like far away harrowed look in the parents' eyes and go, that's one of
All the
us,
kids.
that's one of us.
Yeah.
And then you sort of
I mean
like
that.
tentatively raise it. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know I know some of the parents. I know some of the kids whose parents don't realize it yet, so they're not, and it's sort
yeah.
of, yeah, it's a delicate
And
game.
it's even more difficult if you're autistic yourself as a parent.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because then you've got that whole extra layer of the social challenge,
Yes.
that social stress. Like, I'm not going to go up to somebody in the playground, another parent, and say, hey, is your kid autistic? Because I know I'll get it wrong. I know I'll tone it wrong, and I sound like I'm insulting them or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
And there is still so much stigma around it that people can be very defensive and very isolated just by the actual stigma. So, you can have parents who know that their kids are autistic, but don't want to tell anyone because they feel a kind of taboo
Yeah,
or a shame
absolutely. Yeah.
attached to it, and that makes things very difficult too.
Mm.
And of course, at the center of all of this is children struggling to get into school every day, and we need to get rid of that stigma. We need to recognize and realize that it is a natural part of the diversity of human thought and experience. There's nothing like inherently bad or wrong with being autistic or
No,
even
no.
even ADHD. And I say that as somebody who finds an enormous amount of stress in being ADHD. But we need to rise above all of that because ultimately our kids are the ones at stake.
Yes, absolutely.
They need us. They
Mhm.
they need the adults in the room to do this for them properly and to take it seriously and to fight for the change that they can't really fight for.
Yeah, and it is just
Yeah,
speaking up. It's just speaking up, isn't it? Is the only
yeah,
way to do it.
yeah.
So another of the potential issues that our children have with transitions, I think, is around, well, sometimes can be processing issues. So I
Hmm.
found this, particularly with Otto, this one, is that if you give him too many instructions, he can't process it and he gets overwhelmed and it's just a no. And it's taken a while to learn this because you're so, you're a parent and you're rushing around and then you will sort of say, right, get your shoes on, get your coat on, don't forget your bag. And can you put your dish by the dishwasher, right? That's a lot of instructions that
Hmm.
you're just sort of
Yeah.
barking them at them. And early on, I think that was a trap that we fell into. Oh, I certainly fell into as parents because you're juggling lots of stuff. I've got 3 kids. It's carnage, So it's like, right, I've given you those instructions, and obviously you're just going to do them because that's what I expect from you. So you're placing expectation on your child,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but what you're not understanding, well, what I didn't understand in those days is that every one of those is a demand, and every one of those needs processing, and Otto doesn't process instructions as efficiently as I expect him to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common thing that autistic people are described as having, slower processing speeds. I mean, I, for example, I can't personally follow yoga or exercise videos. I've tried during COVID. I tried,
Okay.
but I can't do it. I can't follow that flurry of verbal instruction. And for many years now, I've been pondering this and trying to work out what's actually going on here. Like, is it a deficiency, in our brains, or is there something else actually happening? And I personally suspect that it's related to the social stress that I talked about earlier.
Okay.
I feel like when I'm given a list of instructions by somebody, especially if there's emotion in the voice, like they're stressed, like you were talking about being a parent, busy parent, then most of my energy in interpreting those instructions is diverted away from what the instructions mean to what the instructions are going to lead to if I get it wrong.
Okay. That's
And overthinking then ensues. Like, basically, I am immediately overthinking, and that slows my processing
so
down.
like it's a test. I'm setting you a test, and if you fail it, and then your mind just kind of, especially Otto, who catastrophizes.
As an autistic person, everything's a test. Or at least it feels like it, because of how much grief we get when we get things wrong. Like it elevates everything to the level of everything becomes high stakes.
Yeah.
Everything. I can be given a flurry of instructions. If I focus my ADHD brain onto the individual instructions as they come, 1, 2, 3, 4, like I can play video games without any problem.
Yes.
And they tend to have a lot of, visual instruction happening all at once and auditory and stuff. I can do it because it doesn't feel very high stakes. If I lose a life, I lose a life.
Yeah.
Like if Sonic the Hedgehog falls down the hole, I just get to try again, and that's fine. Crucially, Sonic the Hedgehog is not going to scream at me for being an idiot who's messed up.
Yes. Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
From a very early age, really frighteningly early age, autistic children learn that they are very prone to getting things wrong because of our misunderstanding of social cues and mishearing and misinterpreting things. And that adds a massive layer of stress onto any instruction given to us.
And I'm just thinking back now to when, like in the early days, when I would just get exasperated. I'm not proud of it, but as a parent, you'd be like, dude, put your shoes on.
Absolutely.
I just asked you to put your shoes on like 5 minutes ago, and we're all ready to go. And what I'm not really understanding at that age was the sort of accumulation of dents to his self-esteem that's happened to the point that he's got to that this is just another failure for him. So it's this transition is more loaded because it's an exam that he's just not going to get right, or if he gets wrong is going to blow up in his face.
And if you get it right, nothing really happens. Like, there's no reward.
But then, if you get it right, you've got to leave the house, right?
You go to the doctors. It's like, oh my god.
And then you've got another issue to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just really. I've just sort of realised how bad of a parent I was for.
Oh no,
like not because I didn't know any better, obviously.
Yeah.
But how unconstructive that approach was for Otto back in those days. I think Jay was a bit more. He was more capable of handling that kind of instruction. I think there's all kinds of PDA issues going on with those demands, so that's a whole separate challenge.
The other thing to bear in mind as well, of course, with autistic people and processing spoken communicative information, processing that is the fact that much of what you might see as automatic, like, for example, identifying humor, identifying sarcasm, identifying the most kind of pertinent point in a sentence, that kind of thing, can be a bit more tricky and a bit more manual for us. And I like to make the point that for many of us, when somebody says something to us, whether it's an instruction or anything really, we have to kind of scan it a bit like your computer's antivirus does.
Yeah.
Like an incoming email. And anyone that's, got an overzealous antivirus on their computer will know how much it slows everything down.
Yes.
Like your whole system starts to crawl, as everything's being scanned. And for me, it's actually a bit like that because, if you were to give me an instruction now, a big part of my brain would be scanning it for, did they mean that?
Where are the traps?
Where are the traps? Are they being sarcastic? I didn't expect that. So there must be something going on here. What if they actually want that other thing? What are they not saying that they actually still want me to do? And that's a particularly big thing in this country because so many instructions in Britain and in British culture, English in particular, are unspoken and hidden and passive aggressive, as I would tend to put it.
Yes.
And therefore you're having to scan everything for that as well. And again, even at an early age, you learn this stuff. You learn that you're not really allowed to ask for anything. And people, if they want something, will ask for it in the weirdest ways. And you've got to identify that somehow.
Yeah.
And it takes up a lot of bandwidth and slows you right down.
I've got a good example of this actually with Otto because he loves football. Absolutely loves playing football. And in the summer holidays, we sort of booked him onto a football club. They're very neurodivergent friendly. Brighton and Hove Albion run a football club. They're amazing. Albion in the community are very active. And he's been before, and I know he likes it. He had a wonderful time. He needed to know, sort of going back to the kind of fear of the unknown, he needed to know that how it looked and, what they were going to be doing. But once he got there and he saw it, he enjoyed it because they play football. And that was great.
Yeah.
I booked him on again this time round. And he was really he saw it on the calendar because we do visual timetable. He saw it on there and he completely melted down and ran upstairs and hid in his room. And I was like, what? But you enjoyed it. Like you won a medal, and you were really proud of yourself. So I sort of went and unpicked it with him. And I was like, which part of it is, the problem? And he was like, well, he said a number of things. One was being in the change rooms at the start. Because he will walk in and there will be people in there and they'll all look at him and he doesn't like being in the center of attention and he doesn't know who's going to be in there. I'm sort of reading between the lines here. And change rooms are kind of noisy and echoey. So so all of these things have triggered him previously. But the other one, which was quite interesting, was that he didn't like doing, they do training drills at the start of any football thing. They just play games to get people warmed up and to practice some techniques and stuff. He hated that. And I realized the reason he hated that is because he's getting fired a load of instructions. Well, they'll be like, right, what I want you to do, right, you're team A, you're team B, you go to the end, dribble the ball down to the end, pass it to your teammate, run back as quick as you can, and then pick up a bib, put it on a cone, do a twirl, and sing the national anthem. I mean, I don't know if that's actually what they did, but that's how I imagine it goes. So Otto had previously just overwhelm, I think, because there's so much to get through that I think he obviously didn't succeed as much as he wanted to succeed in that. So that was just completely overwhelming to him. So I was able to then understand that and then say, okay, how about if I get you out of that bit? Right? If I can talk to them and say, you don't have to do those first two bits, you just play football because you know football, you know what the rules are, easy to do, run around, enjoy it. And then he just lightened. He was like, yes, please do that.
Yeah,
did it.
And that's exactly it.
I explained it to them. So back to the advocacy, I explained it to them and said, this is what he needs. Is that okay? And they're like, of course it is. Yeah, of course it's okay. He can help me put the cones out or whatever while they're doing the training. Brilliant. Fine. Did it and absolutely loved it for 3 days. And it was just making those accommodations, again, as you say, totally free, making those accommodations to sort of lean into his neurotype. And it made a massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my abiding memories personally of, that whole kind of world of sport, PE, football was always overwhelm at the instructions and also overwhelm at just how lacking in patience everyone seemed to be.
Yeah.
There's patience in the classroom, but for some reason, patience just seemed to disappear. When you're a boy, when you're a boy playing a sports game, if you can't do it, you're treated like some kind of absolute weirdo. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Because I couldn't catch, I know that I could have done all those things if I'd been taught how to.
Yeah.
But nobody ever did because I couldn't do them naturally or I hadn't figured them out for myself. and therefore I was just treated immediately as a failure.
And then every time a ball comes to you after that, it's like extra loaded, right?
Yeah, because you're just like, oh, not only am I going to like miss and make a fool of myself, but I'm also going to be hated by everybody here. My teammates are going to think I'm awful, and my opponents are going to laugh at me. I mean, God Almighty, wow!
You're getting stressed just thinking about it.
I am. Yeah, I mean, and the sad thing is that I love a kickabout.
Yeah.
I really, really love kicking a football
such a
around.
difference, though, isn't it? It's such a difference.
But yeah, could not handle that.
This is
could
like
not handle that at all.
Otto loves football, but can't do professional. Like, he can't play in a competition. As soon as he does that, he goes to pieces because of that expectation.
Yeah,
It's not all rubbish.
So the positives, I think, issues with transition. I mean, there aren't many positives. It's difficult for the kids. It's difficult for the parents, especially when you're in a rush. But one positive I could take from it, I think, is that my kids' difficulties with transition were one of the early signs that I had that they were neurodivergent. It was something that was quite noticeably different and quite noticeably anxiety-inducing in a way that it didn't seem to be for others. So I guess that's a positive I could take from it. It's a little flag that's being waved early on for neurodivergency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's. I'll touch on something that we're going to explore in the second episode. Because for me, the reason why autistic people struggle with transition is also exactly the same as why we're so good at some other things.
Yes,
it's like you can't have one without the other, and therefore the presence of transition difficulty actually implies some tremendous strengths.
Yeah.
The key one being our ability to focus, hyperfocus on something and learn so quickly, and derive deep joy from an activity that we are fully engaged in.
Yeah.
And yet that can mean that we struggle to leave that thing and struggle to move on to something else.
Which we'll get
our
on in
singular
too. Very
absolutely. We'll talk about that in great detail. The whole world of monotropism. If you don't know what that is, then
stay
it's
tuned.
something you need to know about that. For me, it's actually my inability to transition is stressful and makes me miserable. But the flip side, my ability to hyperfocus and be creative and dive deep into something is my favorite thing about being autistic. It's this double-sided coin going on here.
Yes.
That you got to take the rough with the smooth, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I would rather struggle with transition. Honestly, I would rather that than not have that monotropic, single-minded focus that I go into.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be me.
Yes.
I wouldn't be recognizably me, and I don't know what that would be like. I'm personally willing on my own terms to take it as a kind of pros and cons kind of thing. I can do this, but that means I can't do this. Okay, fair enough.
That's an awesome point. I'll take that one.
Neurodiversity champions.
Okay, Neurodiversity champions. Now, these are any organizations or people who are doing wonderful things in the world of neurodiversity. Have you got anyone you want to champion for us, Pete?
Yeah, I think based on what I did yesterday, I want to bring up the rally I went on yesterday, which was looking at fighting for ordinary.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Fight for ordinary. And that's the kind of name of that whole push that they're undergoing. It's a number of SEN specialists and people like that involved. But this idea that we find ourselves having to fight for just the bare bones, for just the basics of education, the basics of the workplace when we're adults as well, of course. Just we're always scrabbling for that. And it's exhausting, but it's also really empowering to see, for example, yesterday, so many people doing that.
Great.
Yeah. So many people in London on Parliament Square just demanding that autistic young people, autistic kids, disabled kids, SEN kids of all types and experiences are given the respect that they deserve and the education that they deserve. So yeah, I really wanted to highlight them, doing some fantastic work and pushing and pushing and pushing all the time. And I was delighted to work with them.
Yeah, and thank
So
you for
yeah,
lending your voice to that as well, because obviously the more people that can speak and advocate on behalf of our kids who aren't currently able
absolutely.
to do that for themselves is the better.
Tiny epic wins.
Okay, tiny epic wins now. These are the things that in a neurotypical family would seem run of the mill. No great shakes, but obviously for our neurochambolic families, they're an epic win. So, have you got any tiny epic wins from your neuroverse?
Well, I mean, related back to what I was saying earlier about my daughter kind of, blowing me out the water in terms of, getting on at school.
Yeah.
She was voted the house captain. She's in year 6, so she's
Nice.
now finally has that honor. So she was up against a few of her friends, and she was voted by her peers as the person in charge of the whole house. All the way down to reception.
Wow.
So, I mean, I just couldn't believe it. Like she started there so late, because of COVID and homeschooling, and it was difficult transition. And she's just absolutely blossomed, and now getting things like that going
That's
on,
huge.
and it's
That's huge.
just incredible. And I could never have done that. At
I was
that
going to
age. I
say, could
would
you
have.
what? Can you imagine being in that situation?
No, not at all. Not putting myself through a popular vote.
You'd have had
that would have
one vote,
stressed.
Pete, and that would have been
I
you.
would. No, I wouldn't have voted for myself.
No, true.
I had nowhere near
Okay.
enough self-esteem to do that.
Sorry, we've had a recount. You'd have had no votes, Pete.
No votes, apart from maybe the nice, kind dinner lady who felt sorry for me.
I'm going to refer to the tiny epic win with Otto and the football thing, not for them and their accommodations, but actually for Otto being able to articulate what he needed. And I do this every now and
Absolutely.
again. He does seem to be getting better at being able to articulate what he needs. So obviously he was very overwhelmed by it, and I gave him a bit of space, and then I sort of went up, and I was actually quite surprised that he was able to tell me so clearly what it was, because that really kind of changes the dynamic between us as well, in that we're a team, right? I'm not just sort of speaking on his behalf. We're speaking together as we've had a committee meeting. Team Otto have decided that these are the things that we can do to accommodate for him. And also then to be able to see the success off the back of that he was able to do it, and it was enough for him to be able to enjoy it. I think that's a huge win for me.
It is, and it'll only increase as he gets older, because, as we get older, we get better at advocating for ourselves, better at communicating our needs. So, you'll probably notice, well, until, he hits that teenage wall of not wanting to tell you anything. But, it is something that does tend to happen in many, many cases, that insight increases and things get a bit easier, I think, as a result of that.
What the flip?
Okay, so what the flip moments now? These are the moments where our neurodivergent children will say or do something that completely stops us in our tracks and renders us helpless with confusion. Have you got any what the flip moments for us, Pete?
To be honest with you, most of them come from me.
Okay, these are still valid.
My daughter tends to be pretty much on top of things most of the time, and is often the one. But basically, she tells me off for risking being late in the mornings to school.
Okay.
And it's usually because I've been arguing with somebody online or something like that. And she'll get very grumpy with me.
So you're the one having issues with transition getting out the door.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. She's all ready, she's all organised, and then I'm the one messing everything up by forgetting to do a bottle of water or something like that, and I feel like a dreadful failure of a human being.
No wonder she made house captain.
And so, I mean, she's got a power trip now, so she's on top of everything that goes wrong. So
you taught her everything she knew about managing chaos.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, in my household, it tends to be me who does those things.
I got a couple of what the flip moments. One was Otto that sort of encapsulates sort of the processing thing that we were talking about earlier, where he looked really uncomfortable. He finds it very difficult to understand when he's hungry or when he needs the toilet and that kind of thing.
Interoception.
Interoception is a big kind of sticking point for Otto a lot of the time. And he looked really uncomfortable and he was starting to get quite emotional. He seemed quite dysregulated. So I was like, oh, I know what this is. So I was like, do you need a wee? And he went, I don't want a wee. And I was like, well, do you need to do a poo then? And he went, no, I want to do a wee. It's like, okay.
It's that, there's a delay there.
Yeah,
It's that, just having to, those games where you have drop a marble and there's loads of pins and it has to go blink,
like
blink,
Bagatelle.
blink, 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 yeah. Or that TV show on ITV, where they do it or whatever. I always feel like it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
Like it takes time for the thought to percolate down,
I know.
and then it will land in the little
my
pot.
mistake was asking the question about the poo straight away afterwards. I
Yeah,
should have
too
just
quickly.
waited.
Yeah.
And then
The ball's still dinking around. Yeah.
The other what the flip moment I had with Jay, which is another classic Jay moment, where he'd broken the blinds in his bedroom and I fixed them. And he went, you're the best. Well, not the best, but you're very good. It's a paradox.
Nice.
There's always a better person
Excellent.
if the universe is endless.
Nice. Philosophical. Just what you need.
Philosophical smackdown. It's like, you could have just stopped at you're the best, couldn't you? You didn't have to qualify it. We all know that there are better people. It didn't need saying, did it?
No, but it's that love of clarity and transparency,
exactly. And he left me very clear as to where I stand in his esteem. Okay, so that is going to be it for part one of our delve into transitions. Firstly, Pete, thank you so much for coming to join me.
No problem.
Also wanted to say a huge thank you to the Neuroshambles listeners for continuing to download and spread the word and mention lovely things on the socials. Thanks for that. If you want to contact us on the socials, you can get us on Instagram or Threads or Facebook or TikTok. So please feel free to check us out there. I think that's about it for now. I need to gather my thoughts in time for part 2, which will be coming up soon. So until then, have a nice life.